Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I thought it would be fun today to dye some stroll fingering, which is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, sock yarn with some leftover Tulip tie-dye kit dyes. I mixed these dyes today so they are fresh, and we are going to play around with applying the dye to the yarn while the yarn is dry. A long time ago, I added some Kool-Aid to dry yarn, and then I added some water, and so we got some cool variations. But I want to do something a little differently today. Instead of pouring the dye on top of the yarn and watching it kind of bead off, I am going to add the dye in patterns inside this basin, and then press the dry yarn onto it to get some cool variations of color on our yarn. So with the amount of dye left, I might end up with a lot of white patches, or I might end up with no white patches. But I think that we might get something really cool, so I wanted to give this a shot. And I think I'm going to do, so I've got some purple, some black. Right now I'm just adding colors into here, and they're not mixed up at all. I'm just kind of doing, well, now they're starting to mix up. And I want to use the yarn sort of like a paper towel, and like I was going to be kind of cleaning this up. And so I'm just kind of going and pressing and moving it around on the dye to kind of, you can see that the colors are getting more and more mixed together as I am wiping it up. But what's interesting actually is over here we've got just a tiny bit of color on the yarn. And so we've got areas that have darker patches, but this is actually kind of cool. We might end up with something semi-speckled or something. I don't even know. All right, let's add some more color to it. We'll just do some green, some blue, and some black. So, I mean, I think that I could almost stop here and get a really cool yarn, but I do want to use up this dye. This is part of the purpose of this video, is that I have leftover dye, and I want to play around with it and see what kind of patterns I can get, sort of trying to mop it up with my yarn. And let's do some pink and purple this time. Pink, kind of using up. All right, we've now got two colors that are empty. And let's make it a third. The nice thing about these colors that we have today is that if they get mixed up, they are not going to form like an ugly brown or something. I actually considered holding off part of the yarn entirely to try to maybe have like a dedicated solid white patch, but I think I'm digging this too much to keep that going. I mean, I should have maybe also added some additional ties onto the yarn so it didn't get too tangled, but this actually isn't so bad. I really wonder what will happen overnight with these colors as we let it set. All right, the last of our teal. And the last of our blue. Let's see if there's any areas that I want to sort of prioritize for getting. Now, I'm using all, dye safe equipment, and I'm wearing old clothes because unlike food coloring, this is a dye that's meant for cotton, and you will get some stains if you're not careful. And you saw that I'm also using a bucket that had some stains in it. in case I have trouble rinsing some of these colors out. But, all right, I'm now gonna call that done. Let's take a look at our yarn. The thing that's fun about this is that this technique isn't something that you only have to do with tie-dye. I mean, check it out. Oh, I guess I need to zoom out. I will be right back. So this yarn is really, really cool looking. We've got some specks, we've got some dark patches. I mean, it's a pretty random yarn, but I'm really curious to see how bright pale these colors end up once we rinse out the excess dye tomorrow. I did not lay this yarn directly onto my counter. I had covered it with some plastic wrap first, but this will allow me to wrap up the yarn, even though in this case, since we are painting it in this really random way, it doesn't really need to be wrapped up in plastic wrap because the colors could mix, and that would be fine. That's part of our goal. But anyway, to protect my sink where I will store this overnight, I'm just going to place it in a quart-sized Ziploc bag, and I'm going to let this yarn just sit like this overnight, and tomorrow we will rinse it and wash it and see what kind of colors we ended up with. It is now time to unwrap and rinse our stroll sock yarn that we dyed with the tie-dye kit while the yarn had not been pre-soaked. Now, I expect that the colors will lighten a bit, but this is just so pretty. We poured the liquid dye just into this container and then sort of dabbed it with the yarn. And yeah, you can see a lot of dye is coming out. But I'm curious if the hues will remain dark on the yarn or if they will brighten considerably. Since the yarn was not wet in advance, the dye is actually pretty concentrated in the spots where it was on the yarn. So we could still end up with some really nice and intense colors. And it looks like, you know, we are going to have some really, really deep colors on here, which is very interesting when compared to the 100% wool we dyed with these same bottles, where the colors lightened considerably. I mean, we're still getting a fair amount of bleeding. Since this is a superwash yarn, I am rinsing in slightly warm water now, because I want to try to remove as much of the excess dye as possible. But I think that we're going to end up with a really, really stunning yarn. Oh. It's funny, the white bits are looking a little teal right now, but that's mainly because, I mean, they might have a teal twinge in the end, but they're taking on, no, they'll probably be whitish. They're just taking on sort of the teal quality because that's the color of the rinse water. But man, I know right now, just from looking at this yarn, this dye application technique is something I definitely need to explore further. So, yeah, already the water is significantly clearer, and I'm going to add just some clear liquid dish soap to this to help us dislodge any excess dye, and then once the water runs clear, I will take this to hang up to dry. Here is the finished dried yarn, full of purples, pinks, and teals. I mean, these are my favorite colors in the world, which is one of the reasons why I chose this tie-dye kit, but I love the way that they mix together on this yarn. We have a mixture of bigger patches of color and then also sections with lighter coverage that give us some really, really cool speckling. Here are some of the speckled sections up close. And this is just not something that we get if we were to hand paint the yarn with these dyes. The fact that the yarn was dry allowed us to apply the dye randomly to small sections. And so, when we have this mix of the bigger sections and these more speckled sections, this is something that is really hard to achieve with hand painting unless you are extremely deliberate and apply the dye in little pokes off of a fork or something. Now, maybe it's possible to use this technique in a more controlled manner to limit, maybe to have some colors in some areas and some in the others. But I think that part of the beauty of this technique is the wild randomness you get. And I think that as long as you pick colors that will mix well with one another, that yarn is an amazing, amazing blank canvas for dyeing. For comparison's sake, here is the yarn, which is a superwash wool nylon blend, on top of a 100% cotton tie-dye t-shirt that we created with these same dyes. You can see that the colors have a lot more of a punch on the cotton, but also they weren't really mixed together as much when we did the t-shirt. So these tie-dye colors from the Tulip one-step tie-dye kit worked great on this yarn. But if you want the vibrancy like what you see on a t-shirt, then maybe you want to try this with acid dyes or something that really is more meant for wool than cotton. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I thank you for joining me for this dyeing experiment. I cannot wait to play around with this technique more in the future. I think that it has great potential for using with food coloring and acid dyes and other types of dyes that we use on yarn. I can't wait to try it on everything. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel and give this video a like. Thank you so much for watching.